first, we have a call from Puck in Ohio, and Puck wants to talk about our intuition. Puck, is this the Puck that we know from before? Or is this a new Puck?
This is Puck. Hi.
It's our Puck.
It's our Puck. Hi, Puck.
I have missed you guys so much. You have no idea.
Oh, we missed you too.
We miss you, honey.
So, what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about intuition, yeah?
Yeah, and I know I probably should start by defining what I mean by it. And I suppose a good vague place to start would be when you know something, but you don't know how you know it. And specifically, I'm talking about things like danger assessment or how you will assess how you'll do with another person. And we would like to think that we should trust our instinct. Like, I get a bad feeling about this person. Maybe they'll hurt me, so I'm going to stay away. But it could be the good side, too. Like, I have a good feeling about this person, and it turns out not to work out. But it's very difficult to get a person not to trust their intuition. I was wondering what you guys had to say about intuition.
I mean, I think this is very similar to sort of what Helen was just talking about with pattern recognition sort of things. I don't know, what, like, that's my sense, is that intuition is just some sort of pattern recognition process in your subconscious brain, like what's running in the background, that picks something up and pushes it to the front. I don't know. What do you think, Helen?
I think also, too, this comes with the burden of knowing, like, you learn things, but you don't remember how you learned them. Like, I'm sure that some of the medical stuff that you learned and some of the psychological stuff that I learned, there's something that you don't remember what it was like to learn it. And I think also, too, a lot of the stuff when it comes to intuition stems back to childhood, of learning what is safe and what is not safe, and things that seem familiar to us sometimes can have a hint of danger to them, but you don't know why. Like, this seems familiar. For some reason, I'm getting red flags, or other things that you like feel dangerous. And then afterwards you're like, oh, I had nothing to worry about. Because one thing is, our brains are terrible at this sort of thing. We're terrible at it because we have all these different connections going on in our brains, that between our emotional selves, our conscious self, our logical self. And as logical beings, when we try to differentiate ourselves and pull ourselves back and look at things a little bit more objectively, when those moments of intuition kick in, it's gut. You feel it in your gut. You're like, this doesn't feel right. But your logic will kind of come in and say, like, okay, well, like, let's see this for what it is. And then later you decide if it was benefit to your intuition or not, based on as more information is given. And it's just because as you've grown up and gone through different situations, your brain, you have this natural instinct inside yourself to protect yourself and to be attracted to things that are safe. So we tend to pull ourselves to things that make us feel safe and pull us away. And then when we get more information, we go, oh, you know what? I was right about this, or I was wrong about this, or, hey, it's a little bit in the middle, because we always rationalize after the fact when we have those moments of intuition. It's barely ever in the moment, because that's just how our brains are wired. So does that make sense, Puck? Like, I don't know if this was on the line that you were trying to go down, but this is what I thought of when you were talking.
No, it does help. And I guess my problem with intuition is, if you don't know where it came from, you don't know if it came from a fallacious source. And it's too prone to, I forget what the name of the fallacy is, because I was always horrible at philosophy. When you say something like, oh, I have a bad feeling about this person, therefore I will not interact with this person. Oh, I'm safe, therefore I must have been right about my intuition that this person was not safe. I forget what the survivor bias or confirmation, but that's it. Right. So, like, I don't know that people spend enough time trying to finely tune and calibrate their intuition, or if they just go with the, well, it served me okay so far, and I'm going to count the hits and forget the misses. So this is why I wonder if it's really worth relying on if you get a bad feeling about assessing a dangerous situation, or how your relationship with a certain person is going to go.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that
Like, have we tried building relationships with people that we have a bad feeling about to see if their bad feeling was justified?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I actually think that we, at least in my experience, you get a lot more intuitions when they're negative. Like, I think you get a lot more negative intuitions than you do positive intuitions. And I think that's part of like the nature of just our body wanting to avoid harm more than anything else, or, our humans in general wanting to avoid harm. And I think there probably is an element of confirmation bias that goes into it. And you're right, that if we don't analyze the intuitions, then how do we know, right? So I totally agree with your concern there. What do you think, Helen?
Well, I think that like there's something. So if you're having that gut reaction, I think that it takes a moment for you to go like, why do I feel this way? And we're terrible at this. Like we are, because we are very emotional, unreasonable meat bags at times. So it takes us a moment to like go, why am I feeling this way? And I think that when you have those feelings of frustration, or something feels off, or something feels very right, and when it feels very right, it's much more difficult to do this because we are pleasure seeking creatures, and we're not going to question so much when things feel really great, because it's like, getting the dopamine dump, and then your brain's like, yay, this is going to be wonderful. And then later on, you found like the person that you were having this really wonderful experience with turns out to be a jerk face. But in the moment, it felt wonderful. Those times when the fear kicks in or something feels wrong, we will tend to want to pay more attention to that, because that's the survival part of our lizard brain, yelling at us. So I don't know exactly how we would do this, because we're kind of crappy at it, but taking a moment to differentiate and go, okay, my intuition is telling me that this may be great, or this is going to be kind of crappy, or somewhere in the middle. I think still taking that moment to analyze it and kind of going in with a little bit more of your skeptic brain on can help, because it might help people. Because I know I've had to engage this in certain relationships, because I've had to overcome trauma. And when you're overcoming trauma, it is very guttural and instinctual, and it feels intuitive. But at the same time, the trauma may not be accessing things correctly for you. So you have to, and I learned this through therapy. This is not anything that you learn just like, right off the bat, like from 2 tries. This is something that took me a long time to practice, to take a moment and go, am I really under threat? Am I really in harm's way? Because something might seem harmful and it's not, or something might seem positive. It might seem like you're in a trustworthy, someone that you're willing to give your trust to, and you're not. So you have to be the gauge in that, because there's something in your gut that's telling you this is familiar to me, whether it's good or bad, and it's something I should pay attention to. But do you give in completely to your intuition? I would try to engage your skeptic brain. You're going to be really crappy at it, because we're just crappy at it, but you just gotta, but it's something that you should always have that question on your head going, is this too good to be true? Or, that type of thing, like, I think that helps. I think it helps people that are skeptical not to be fooled into certain situations and that kind of thing, because like, that's kind of my reading on it, because we're terrible at gauging situations a good portion of
And
the
I
time,
think you
because
bring
it's
up a
all
good
instinct.
point.
Yeah.
You bring up a good point, Helen, because I think that maybe we're talking about a select, like we're already self-selecting a group here. I think maybe a lot of people don't think about their intuition and where it comes from, and they just say, oh, well, I feel like this is a bad situation. It's my intuition, you know? And so I'm just going to trust my intuition, trust my gut sort of thing. Like, how often do you hear that? Or something like, oh, mother's intuition. And like you hear about someone doing something crazy on the news because they had a mother's intuition about it. I think, Puck, your point is like extremely well made. If you don't engage your logical brain and try to analyze why you're feeling the way you're feeling, which is a very psychological technique, right? Like, Helen, I think you're betraying your own training
I am.
when
Yes, I am.
you say that, because most people, when they have an emotion, it's not their first reaction to say, now why do I feel that way? They just feel it and act on it, right? But it's like a
Yes.
very insightful reaction to put the brakes on and say, well, wait, why am I feeling this way? What, like, is it a real thing? Like, is this fear that I'm feeling a real threat? Or is it something that's a product of like some lizardy part of the brain, you know? So I think it's a very like insightful way of looking at it, and a lot of people might not look at it that way. So I totally get where Puck's coming from on this one. Anything else you want to add,
the other
Puck?
thing is we would tell people, like, we will tell our kids something like, if you feel unsafe, like, you don't wait to, like, just, if you feel unsafe, act as if it's not safe and get yourself out of the situation, which is kind of the same as saying, I validate your intuition. But, you know, it's like, I guess maybe at a young age, you wouldn't know how to differentiate, like, just err on the side of caution versus, you know, this is a proper, good assessment of the situation.
Right, but that's the survival. That's the survival instinct that's selected for, right? It's like what Dan Dennett writes about in whatever that book is, somewhere behind me, Breaking the Spell, maybe, where he talks about, like, you know, the person who had the intuition that there might be a tiger in the bushes and ran away is going to live longer, even if they're wrong. Like, that's the safer error to make. Is the false positive error than the person who intuits there might be a tiger but ignores it and says, well, I'm just going to continue, and then they get eaten by the tiger, right? If they're false negative. So yeah, I think that's like it totally buys into our, like, the way our superstitions are programmed into us by our evolutionary history. That's the way I interpret it anyway.
Well,
what do you think, Puck?
But since we know that, are we going to then take the next step and say, then the proper thing is to throw out intuition as a means of gaining knowledge? Because I don't think we want to go that far either.
I agree, but I don't think it's a way that you gain knowledge, right? It's a way of, like, I think it's like Helen said, you have to analyze why you're feeling something, because you say, well, you analyze it and you say, why am I feeling this way? What situations have I seen? And you try to, like, bring it to the forefront and analyze it logically. And then you can, if you're able to do that, maybe you can, you know, figure out why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and then validate the intuition, or not validate the intuition.
Well, I appreciate your insights and thoughts, you guys. I am, like I said, I'm a complete abolitionist. If I get a gut feeling about something, I get them just like everybody else does, but I put them completely aside and say, nope, I'm not going to even listen to that at all. And I'm going to try to do as much of a logical, rational, you know, what can I explain about the situation? And that's usually what I go by, but maybe I'm taking it too far. So I appreciate the insights.
Hey, I mean, I totally buy it, and thanks for your call, Puck. We'll let you go, but I just want to tell you a quick story about when I was in med school. We had, obviously, like, bioethics, medical ethics lectures, and one of the things that really struck me was one of our professors. His whole point was that you can't rely on your intuitions, your moral intuitions, you know, the stuff that's been programmed into you, because the stuff that you encounter is so often different and doesn't apply. And if you follow your intuitions, you're gonna fall into the wrong answer. And so that applies to, like, everything, the air quotes wrong answer from the, I guess you could say, from like the Western medical perspective. But that's stuff like, do you want to save everyone? Like, is it always the right thing to do to save someone's life? And like, I think most modern ethicists would argue that it's not always the right thing to do to save someone's life, because there are states that are worse than death, things like suffering, things like, and especially against someone's own will, right? And so that whole point of not necessarily trusting your intuition, questioning it, and even, like Puck was saying, rebelling against it intentionally and sort of going where it leads you, because it can often generate a very like visceral reaction in your own mind, right? It makes you like, sometimes people describe that feeling of like, oh, I felt repulsed by the idea of doing X. Like even thinking about it repulsed me. And so it can be a real block for some people. I don't know. Have you encountered that sort of thing before, Helen?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be human. I don't think if I didn't encounter those things. To be fair, and it is really interesting because like we do have this tendency to throw caution to the wind, and and just experience things, though, like our everything in our environment is telling us like, don't do that. We've all done it, because we want to have the experience. And sometimes it's really positive, and other times things get, kind of blow up in your face, Yeah. A good portion of the time, sometimes nothing catastrophic happens, and
Right.
that's the gamble of the dice, I think a good majority of people that have had, enough of these experiences and some good guidance going on, that they are good, even though the intuition is telling them not to, the risk is minimal.
Yeah.
So they'll override that desire to,
and that, but that's their mind doing it, right? That's their like
that's
logical brain.
the mind.
It's not.
Yeah. Because we can rationalize ourselves into anything.
That's true.
Like if we are, for good or bad things, like, do I need another, do I need something that I could make coffee, which would save me money, or I could go to Starbucks, but I'll rationalize myself going to Starbucks. I'm like, instead of like, making coffee, I get 5 more minutes to like, sleep in or whatever it is. And like, and I need more sleep because, I work hard, and it only takes me an additional 10 minutes to go to Starbucks in the morning, or however we ever rationalize it. That's what we do, totally. And it, because we're pleasure seeking creatures and we're going to do what we want. But I think that just the way that we tend to want to have justifications for the way that we behave, and we will rationalize ourselves into those decisions, whether it's intuition or not.
Yeah, it's very hard to do it the other way.
Yeah, you can't do it the other way. You can't say like I reasoned myself into it, but it was really my intuition. It's always the opposite.
Yeah.